The first time she saw the bear, it wasn't moving, it was waiting. Mara had stepped outside into the pre-dawn hush, the sky a pale wash behind the skeletal pines, when she spotted the massive shape standing at the far edge of the clearing. Snow clung to its thick fur, turning the brown into something ghostly, almost silver. It didn't rear up or huff in warning. It simply stood there, eyes fixed on her, as if it had been waiting for her to notice. A sane person would have gone back inside. But there was something in the way it turned, slow and deliberate, padding into the tree line without a glance back, that made her set her coffee on the porch rail and start walking. She didn't bother with gloves. She didn't lock the door. All she thought about was keeping its tracks in sight before the falling snow swallowed them. She didn't know yet that the bear was leading her somewhere. She didn't know that what waited ahead would make her question her own memory or what had been taken from it. Mara's boots broke through the crusted top layer of snow with a muffled crunch, each step sinking her to mid-calf. The cold bit at her ankles where her socks had slipped, but she barely felt it. Her eyes stayed locked on the tracks ahead, massive, deep impressions spaced with a steady, unhurried rhythm. The bear moved like it knew the forest better than the snow did. It weaved between the thick black trunks of old pines, each branch weighed heavy with white. Sometimes it vanished behind a drift, and she would break into a trot to catch sight of it again, breath clouding the air in bursts. It never looked back. The further she went, the more muffled the world became. Her cabin was far behind her now, and with it, the faint hum of the wind through the clearing. Here, the snow seemed to absorb every sound, her footsteps, her breath, even the creak of the trees. The silence pressed in, thick and complete. Every few minutes, the bear would slow, its great head swinging side to side as if listening. Once, it stopped entirely, the snowflakes settling on its broad shoulders. Mara froze where she was, her heart pounding in the stillness. It turned its head just enough for her to see the profile of its muzzle, not snarling, not baring teeth. Just watching. She didn't know why she trusted that it wouldn't harm her. She had no reason to, except for the strange calm that radiated from it, even from this distance. When it moved again, she found herself following without hesitation. The snow began to change as they pressed deeper into the forest. It was softer here, untouched except for the bear's trail. No rabbit prints, no deer tracks, as if the other animals avoided this place. The pines gave way to taller, straighter trees, their trunks pale and ghost-like under the overcast sky. Mara realized she didn't recognize this part of the forest. She had lived here for over 2 years, had walked miles of trails in every season, but this was new. Or it should have been. A strange feeling stirred at the base of her skull, like the flicker of a memory trying to surface. She shook her head as if to clear it and kept moving. After nearly an hour, the land began to slope downward. The bear moved with ease, its weight distributing on those wide paws, but Mara had to dig in her heels to keep from slipping. The slope narrowed into a kind of corridor between 2 ridges, the snow thinner here, revealing the rough shapes of old stones half buried in frost. It was here she noticed the smell. Not strong, but distinct, wood smoke. Her heart gave a sudden, hard thud. No one lived out here. The nearest neighbor was nearly 3 miles in the other direction. The bear's pace never changed. It rounded a bend in the corridor and vanished from sight. Mara quickened her steps, nearly stumbling in her haste. The trees parted suddenly, and she found herself standing at the edge of a small hollow. And there it was. A cabin. The roof sagged under the weight of snow, the logs dark with age, but it was standing, solid, complete, the chimney leaning slightly to one side. Smoke curled faintly from it, a fragile ribbon against the pale sky. Mara's breath caught. She had never been here before. She was sure of it. And yet, she knew the shape of that roofline, the way the porch steps tilted just slightly to the left. Her boots felt heavy as she stepped down into the hollow. The bear stood beside the porch, its head lowered, breath steaming in the cold. It looked at her then, not a warning, not a challenge. An invitation. She approached slowly, her eyes scanning the details. The window frames were weathered but intact, the glass opaque with frost. The porch boards creaked under her weight. She reached for the railing and froze. The wood was warm. She jerked her hand back instinctively, staring at it as though it could explain what she'd felt. The warmth wasn't the faint leftover heat of sunlight on a winter day. It was the kind of warmth that came from within. From life. Her heart hammered in her chest. She glanced at the bear. It remained still, watching her with an intensity that felt almost human. The door was slightly ajar. Mara. Her name. Spoken softly, but from inside. She stumbled back a step, the snow crunching under her heel. Her breath came fast and shallow. She hadn't heard another human voice in days, and she didn't recognize this one. The bear didn't move. Mara, the voice said again. Closer now. Her mind raced. She should run. She should turn around and follow her own tracks back to the safety of her cabin. But her hand found the edge of the door, and before she could stop herself, she pushed it open. Warmth rushed over her like a wave, carrying with it the scent of burning pine and something faintly sweet, like bread baking. The interior was dim, the only light coming from a small fire in the hearth. She stepped inside. The door swung shut behind her. And for a moment, she forgot about the bear, about the snow, about the voice. Because she was looking at photographs, dozens of them, tacked to the walls. All of them were of her. Some as she was now, bundled in her coat in the winter forest. Some in summer, wearing a light dress, hair pulled back. And others, impossibly, of her as a child, standing in front of this very cabin. Mara stood in the center of the cabin, her boots dripping melted snow onto the worn floorboards. The heat from the hearth wrapped around her like a blanket, but it did nothing to steady the hammering of her heart. Her gaze roamed the walls again. The photographs were pinned haphazardly, overlapping in some places, curling at the corners. The older ones were in sepia tones, their edges frayed. The newer ones, if they could be called newer, had a muted, washed-out look, as if they'd been printed years ago. She stepped closer to one near the window. It showed a girl, no more than 8 or 9, wearing a red wool coat and a knitted hat with a pom-pom. The girl stood on the porch of this very cabin, her gloved hands wrapped around the railing, a thin smile on her face. Mara felt the air leave her lungs in a slow, uneven stream. She had that coat once, she remembered the itchy lining, the way the buttons had been shaped like little wooden hearts. But she didn't remember ever being here. Behind her, the fire popped softly. She turned toward the sound and froze. A figure was seated in the chair nearest the hearth, its back to her. From this angle, she could make out the curve of a shoulder under a heavy knit sweater, the shape of a head bent slightly forward. The voice that spoke was low, calm. You took your time. Mara's mouth felt dry. Who are you? The figure didn't move. Someone who kept the cabin warm for you. The words sent a shiver down her spine. She glanced toward the door, but the memory of the bear standing outside kept her rooted. She had the uncanny sense that leaving wasn't an option, not yet. She stepped toward the chair, her boots creaking on the floor. "Why are there pictures of me here?" The figure shifted, one hand lifting to rest on the armrest. The skin was pale, the veins faintly visible under the thin layer of flesh. "Because you've been here before." "I haven't." "You don't remember," the voice said gently, almost with pity. "That's different." Mara's stomach churned. She forced her feet to carry her closer until she stood beside the chair. The person sitting there was an older woman, her hair silver and long, braided over one shoulder. Her face was lined, but her eyes, pale green, sharp, studied Mara as if she were a puzzle with a missing piece. "You were here," the woman said. "A long time ago. You stayed with me through a winter much colder than this one." Mara shook her head. "I think I'd remember something like that." The woman's lips curved into a faint smile. "Unless someone made you forget." The firelight flickered over the woman's face, casting the rest of the cabin into shadows. Mara glanced toward the wall of photographs again. Some of them showed the older woman too, younger, standing beside Mara in the snow, both of them bundled in coats. The memories didn't come. Only a hollow ache at the edges of her mind. She swallowed hard. "What do you mean, made me forget?" The woman leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "You were brought here the first time because it was safe. There were people looking for you, but not the kind who wanted to take you home. The bear led you then, just as he did now." Only this time, her voice trailed off, and she glanced toward the window. "This time is different." Mara followed her gaze. Through the frost-clouded glass, she could just make out the dark shape of the bear still standing beside the porch. She felt a strange pull, not just toward the bear, but toward the idea that it had been here before, with her, in another winter she couldn't recall. The older woman rose slowly from the chair. She was taller than Mara expected, her movements deliberate. She crossed to the far side of the cabin and picked up something from a small table. When she returned, she held out a folded piece of paper. Mara took it, her fingers brushing the woman's. The paper felt fragile, almost brittle. She unfolded it carefully. It was a map. Not a modern one, but hand-drawn, with neat ink lines marking ridges, streams, and shaded areas for forest. In the center was a small square labeled simply Home. The woman tapped the square with a long, thin finger. "This is where you belong." Mara frowned. "This is your cabin." The woman's smile deepened, almost sad. "It was yours first." Mara laughed once, short and sharp. "I think I'd know if I owned a cabin in the middle of nowhere." "You didn't own it. You were born here." The words hit her like a sudden plunge into icy water. She stared at the woman, trying to gauge whether this was some cruel joke. "That's not possible." "Isn't it?" Mara felt the room tilt slightly, her pulse in her throat. She tried to remember her earliest years, but the images were vague: a cramped apartment, the scent of her mother's perfume, the hum of city traffic outside a window. No snow. No cabin. No bear. The woman's voice softened. "They took you away when you were still small enough to carry. They wanted you to forget this place. But the forest doesn't forget its own." The floorboards creaked as Mara stepped back. "Why are you telling me this now?" The woman glanced again toward the window. The bear's shadow shifted in the falling snow. "Because winter is ending, and soon it won't be safe here. You have to choose, stay this time, or go and never return." Mara's breath quickened. "And if I stay?" The woman didn't answer directly. She only said, "Then you'll remember everything." Mara's fingers tightened around the map until the edges bent. The inked lines seemed to waver in the firelight, the square marked home pulling at her gaze like a fixed point in the dark. She wanted to dismiss it, to tell herself this woman was mistaken, confused, or weaving some strange backwoods folklore. But the air in the cabin was thick with something more than wood smoke, something she could almost taste. It was the feeling of being inside a memory she hadn't yet lived. She tried to hand the map back, but the woman didn't take it. "It's yours," she said. "It's always been yours." Mara slipped it into her coat pocket if only to free her hands. "Why would I have left?" she asked finally. The older woman's eyes softened, though her jaw stayed tight. "Because they came. People who wanted the land, who didn't care who had to disappear for them to get it. You were a child. You didn't have a choice." Mara shook her head. "I don't." But she stopped. Because there, at the very edge of her mind, a sound emerged, the crunch of snow under frantic feet, the harsh breathing of someone running, and the deep, steady rhythm of something larger pacing alongside her. The bear. She turned toward the frosted window again. The animal still stood in the same place, massive and still as a carved statue. Snow had begun to gather along its back, but it didn't shake it off. It waited. "What does he have to do with this?" Mara asked quietly. The woman smiled faintly. "Everything. He's the reason you survived the first time. And the reason you found your way back." "That's not possible." The woman tilted her head. "Not everything that's real fits neatly into what you think is possible." The fire popped sharply, startling Mara. She moved toward it, drawn to its warmth, and noticed something else on the mantel, a small wooden box, smooth with age, its lid carved with a simple pine tree. "May I?" she asked. The woman nodded. Mara lifted the lid. Inside lay a collection of objects, a tiny stone shaped like a heart, a coil of thin blue ribbon, and a rusted key no bigger than her thumb. She picked up the key, feeling the chill of the metal even in the warm room. "What's this for?" The woman's gaze flicked toward the floor, then back to Mara. "You'll see." The cryptic answer prickled at her nerves. She wanted to demand more, but the pull of the bear outside was growing, a steady presence pressing at the edge of her awareness. The woman must have seen the shift in her expression because she said, "If you leave now, you might not find this place again. The snow covers more than the ground, it buries the paths you can't see." Mara swallowed. "And if I stay?" "You'll remember," the woman said again. "All of it. Even the parts you might wish to forget." A sharp gust rattled the cabin's window, scattering a small drift of snow from the sill outside. The sound made Mara's chest tighten, not from fear, exactly, but from a strange sense of urgency. "I need to think," she murmured, already moving toward the door. The woman didn't stop her. She only said, "The choice will find you, whether you make it or not." Mara paused at the threshold, her hand on the doorframe. She glanced back once, committing the scene to memory, the older woman in the firelight, the wall of photographs, the small box on the mantel. Then she stepped outside. The cold hit her like a wall, stealing her breath. Snow swirled in lazy spirals through the hollow, but the bear's shape was clear against the white, its dark fur stark against the drifted ground. It turned as she approached, lumbering a few steps toward the slope that led out of the clearing. Then it stopped, looking back at her, waiting. Her legs moved without her deciding. She followed, the snow crunching beneath her boots, the key heavy in her pocket. They climbed out of the hollow, the cabin vanishing behind the rise, and entered the deeper woods again. The bear's path was straight, purposeful, cutting through untouched snow. They walked for what felt like hours. The light shifted from the pale gray of midday to the dim blue of afternoon. Mara's breath came in sharp bursts now, but she didn't ask the bear to slow. Finally, they emerged into a small clearing bordered by ancient pines. In the center stood a mound of snow-covered stones, their arrangement deliberate, almost architectural. The bear stopped beside it, lowering its head to nudge at the snow until a corner of one stone was exposed. Mara stepped closer. The exposed surface was carved with something, not words, but a symbol. A pine tree, simple and familiar. The same carving as on the wooden box in the cabin. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She knelt, brushing away more snow, revealing a shallow depression between the stones. She reached into her pocket for the key. It fit into a hidden slot at the base of one stone. When she turned it, something inside the mound shifted with a soft grind. Beneath a loose slab lay a metal box, smaller than she expected, its surface mottled with rust. She pulled it free and set it on the snow. The bear stood motionless, watching. Mara opened the box. Inside were more photographs, but these were different. They weren't of her as a child or adult. They were of the cabin, taken from angles she didn't recognize, some in summer with wildflowers spilling across the porch, others in deep winter, the roof heavy with snow. And in every one, somewhere in the frame, the bear appeared. Sometimes in the background, half hidden by trees. Sometimes closer, watching from the edge of the porch. The oldest photograph, creased and fading, showed the bear beside the cabin door. And in the doorway, a woman holding a bundled infant. Her. Mara stared until her vision blurred. The air felt thinner here, the silence heavier. She didn't know if she wanted to see more or bury the box again and walk away. The bear turned then, heading back toward the trees. This time, when it looked over its shoulder, Mara followed without hesitation, the metal box in her arms, the key still warm from where it had rested in the lock. The bear led her deeper into the pines, its movements unhurried but steady, like it knew she would keep up. Mara clutched the metal box close to her chest, the cold of its surface biting through her gloves. She could hear her own breathing, the crunch of her boots in the snow, and nothing else, no birdsong, no wind. Just the forest and the quiet authority of the animal in front of her. Her mind spun with images from the photographs, the cabin through the seasons, the bear always there. The idea that it had been part of her life since she was an infant was too large to fit into her thoughts, yet the evidence lay heavy in her arms. She wanted answers, but the bear could give none. Still, she felt the same strange certainty as before, that it was leading her toward them. The trees thinned as they reached a frozen stream. The bear crossed first, its weight barely breaking the crust of ice. Mara followed carefully, stepping in its prints, the slick surface groaning faintly beneath her boots. On the other side, the land rose into a ridge lined with smaller, younger trees, their branches straining under the snow. As they climbed, Mara noticed the faint remains of a path, uneven stones buried beneath layers of frost. It was too straight to be natural, yet so overgrown it had clearly been abandoned for decades. The bear followed it without hesitation. When they reached the crest, Mara stopped short. Below lay a wide, shallow valley, its floor dotted with the skeletal remains of wooden structures, beams collapsed inward, roofs caved under years of weather. The snow softened their decay, making them look almost peaceful. But it wasn't the ruins that caught her breath. It was the way the valley felt familiar. A pulse of recognition thrummed at the base of her skull, unbidden and unexplainable. She knew the curve of that ridge, the bend of the frozen stream that wound through the far end. She had been here. The bear descended into the valley, weaving between the ruins. Mara followed, scanning the remnants. Some were no more than piles of rotted timber. Others still had frames standing, doorways leading into nothing. One structure stood more intact than the rest, a small shed with half its roof missing, its door hanging crooked. The bear paused in front of it, waiting until Mara stepped inside. The interior smelled of damp wood and rust. Snow sifted down through the broken roof in slow, spiraling flakes. Against the far wall sat an old trunk, its surface scarred and stained with age. Mara set the metal box down and knelt to touch the trunk. The lock was broken, the clasp hanging loose. She lifted the lid. Inside were blankets, brittle with age, and beneath them, a stack of notebooks. Their covers were worn, the pages yellowed. She lifted one carefully, flipping it open. The handwriting inside was neat but faded, written in long, looping strokes. Winter, 1991. The snow is deeper this year than I've ever seen. The bear comes every day to the edge of the meadow. She's grown used to me, but she won't come closer. I think she's watching for the girl. Mara's chest tightened. She flipped forward. March, 1992. They took her away. Said it was for her own good. I don't think she remembers me anymore. The bear still waits. She shut the notebook, her pulse loud in her ears. The valley around her felt suddenly heavier, as though the air itself carried the weight of these words. She wanted to keep reading, but the bear had stepped closer to the shed's entrance, its massive frame filling the doorway. It didn't growl, didn't make a sound, but Mara felt the message all the same. There was more to see. She took one last look at the trunk, slid the notebook back inside, and stood. The bear led her toward the far end of the valley, where the snow lay deeper and untouched. Here, the skeletal remains of buildings gave way to open ground, framed by dark trees. At the very edge stood a tall post, its top carved into a simple pine shape, the same as on the box, the same as on the stone mound. Mara approached slowly. The post wasn't just decorative. At its base, buried beneath the snow, was another slab of stone. She brushed away the frost with her gloves. Words emerged, faint but legible. For those who remember, and those who must. Her breath caught. She didn't know exactly what it meant, but something in her bones did. This valley had been important. To her family? To the woman in the cabin? To the bear? The animal stepped closer to the stone, lowering its head. It stood there for a long moment, snow catching in the thick fur around its ears. Then, slowly, it turned away, looking back toward the ridge they had crossed. Mara understood. It was time to leave. They climbed out of the valley as the light began to fade. The clouds had thickened, and the air smelled faintly of more snow on the way. When they reached the top, Mara glanced back one last time. The valley lay quiet, its ruins half hidden, the post standing like a sentinel in the center. She didn't know if she'd ever find it again on her own. But she suspected the bear would know. At the ridge, the bear paused, letting her catch up. For the first time since they'd left the cabin, it met her gaze directly. There was no fear in its eyes, no wildness, only recognition. And in that moment, Mara felt the first thread of memory tug loose in her mind. A child's laughter in the snow. The warmth of a fire in a log cabin. The sound of a bear's heavy breathing beside her in the dark, not threatening, but protective. She stopped walking, the vision fading as quickly as it came. The bear waited. Mara tightened her grip on the metal box and began to follow again. The ridge descended into thicker forest, where the trees grew so close together the snow on the ground was patchy, interrupted by dark roots and fallen branches. The bear moved with ease, slipping between trunks and over logs, while Mara had to watch every step. The metal box was heavier now, not in weight but in the burden it carried, proof of something she couldn't yet explain. Her mind kept circling back to the words carved at the base of the post, for those who remember and those who must. The phrase pressed on her like an unfinished sentence, demanding the rest. The bear's steady pace gave her too much time to think. She remembered the old woman in the cabin, the way she had spoken as if Mara's return was inevitable. She remembered the trunk of notebooks in the shed and the entry about the girl who had been taken away. Every detail seemed to close around one truth: she had been here before. But if she had, why had her mother never spoken of it? Why had there been no mention, no photograph, no hint that she had ever belonged to a world beyond city streets? The answer she dreaded most was the one that felt most possible, that someone had deliberately buried those memories. The bear led her into a narrow pass between two massive boulders, their surfaces slick with ice. The space was so tight that her shoulder brushed stone on one side and snow-laden branches on the other. When they emerged, the ground opened into a small, sunken grove. It was almost circular, surrounded by tall spruce that blocked the wind, making the air feel still and insulated. At the center stood another structure, not a cabin, not a ruin, but something between. A single-room shelter with a pitched roof and walls of rough-hewn logs, intact but weathered. Its door hung slightly ajar. The bear stopped a few paces away, lowering itself to sit in the snow. Mara approached cautiously. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a dark interior lit only by the dim gray light filtering through a small window. The air smelled of dust and pine sap. A bed frame stood against the wall, stripped bare. Beside it, a small table held a rusted lantern and a chipped mug. On the far wall hung a wooden plaque, carved with the same pine tree symbol she had seen at the stone mound and in the valley. Beneath the plaque was a wooden chest, smaller than the trunk in the ruins but locked. She knelt and tested it. The lock resisted at first, then gave with a sharp snap. Inside were folded blankets, carefully stacked, and under them, a tin box. She pulled it out, noting how light it felt compared to the metal one she carried. When she opened it, she found not photographs this time, but letters. Dozens of them, written on thick paper in the same looping script as the notebook in the shed. She pulled one out and began to read. Mara, if you are reading this, you have found your way back without me. That means the bear did what I could not, it kept its promise. She froze. The handwriting was familiar in a way she couldn't name, like hearing a voice from a dream. You were never meant to leave, but when they came, I had no choice. I thought they might let you return when you were older. I didn't realize they would try to make you forget entirely. Her pulse raced as she scanned the rest. If you choose to stay, the cabin is yours. The land is yours. But you will need to remember enough to understand what that means. The bear can show you what I cannot put in words. Follow it. Trust it. It has known you since the day you were born. The letter was unsigned. She checked the next one, but it was blank except for a date in the corner, years ago. She put the letters back, closed the tin, and sat back on her heels. The bear had shifted closer to the doorway, its massive head blocking some of the light. Mara met its eyes, and for a heartbeat, the years between them vanished. She felt an almost physical echo of being smaller, younger, looking up at that same face and feeling not fear, but safety. Her throat tightened. "You've been watching me all this time." The bear blinked slowly, then turned its head toward the grove's edge. Mara rose, tucking the letter tin into her coat alongside the map and the key. She stepped outside, closing the shelter's door behind her. The bear led her out of the grove and back into open forest. The snow was falling harder now, the flakes thick and fast, blurring the trees ahead. She pulled her hood up and quickened her pace to stay close. They traveled in silence until the trees parted and the cabin appeared again, smoke curling from its chimney. The older woman was standing on the porch, her arms crossed against the cold. "You found it," she called, her voice carrying through the snow. Mara stopped at the edge of the clearing. "You knew about the shelter." "I knew you would need it," the woman replied. "And that you'd find more than shelter there." Mara stepped forward, the bear matching her pace. "Why didn't you tell me before?" The woman's expression softened. "Because you wouldn't have believed me. You needed to see it yourself. You needed to feel it." Mara glanced at the bear, then back at the woman. "And now?" "Now," the woman said, "you have to decide." The bear let out a low rumble, so deep she felt it in her chest. Mara looked toward the tree line, then back at the cabin, then at the snow filling the air between them. The decision wasn't just about staying or leaving. It was about choosing whether to reclaim a life she hadn't known was hers, and everything that came with it. She didn't answer. Not yet. But for the first time, she wanted to. That night, Mara lay awake in the small bed in the cabin's single bedroom, the fire's heat fading into the deeper chill of winter air seeping through the logs. The older woman slept in the next room, her quiet breathing audible through the wall. Outside, the snow fell relentlessly, blanketing the world in a silence that pressed on the windows. The letter's words wouldn't leave her mind. "The bear did what I could not, it kept its promise." A promise. She turned onto her back and stared at the dark ceiling. She tried to picture the face of the writer, someone who had known her name, who had known enough to hide the letters in a place the bear would lead her to. Someone who had believed she'd be taken. The possibilities narrowed to a single, unspoken truth: it had been family. At some point, she must have drifted into a shallow, restless sleep. She woke before dawn to the sound of movement outside, a heavy, deliberate shifting in the snow. She rose quietly, pulling on her coat, and stepped onto the porch. The bear stood at the tree line again, the same as that first morning. Snow dusted its fur. It turned as soon as she appeared, moving into the forest without hesitation. Mara hesitated for only a moment before following. The world was blue with early light, the snow reflecting it in every direction. The bear led her down a narrow path she hadn't taken before, its trail weaving between frozen streams and low rises. They walked for nearly an hour before the trees opened onto a small meadow. In the center, half buried under snow, was a large stone slab. Mara approached, brushing snow from its surface. The slab was engraved, though the letters were worn and shallow. She leaned closer, tracing them with her gloved fingers. Elena Gray. The name caught in her chest. She didn't know why until it surfaced from somewhere deep and old, a memory, or the ghost of one. A voice. "Elena will keep you safe, Mara." The bear circled the slab once, then settled in the snow beside it. Mara knelt, clearing more snow until the rest of the engraving showed 1971 to 1998. A date range. A life cut short. The name and years didn't match anyone Mara knew now, but they rang with the strange resonance of something once familiar. She realized with a jolt that she had seen the name before, carved faintly into the bottom corner of the first photograph she had found in the box at the stone mound. The photographer. Her hands shook as she sat back. If Elena Gray had been the one to take those photographs, to write those letters, then she had been more than a bystander. She had been the keeper of something, of someone. And the year of her death explained why the bear had been waiting alone. Mara felt the weight of the metal box in her pack, the letter tin tucked inside her coat. They weren't just remnants. They were what remained of someone's promise, one that had been passed to the bear when Elena couldn't keep it anymore. The bear lifted its head then, its gaze fixed not on Mara but on the far edge of the meadow. She followed its line of sight and froze. Two figures stood just beyond the trees, dark shapes against the snow. They didn't move closer, but Mara's instincts prickled. Their stillness wasn't the quiet patience of the bear, it was watchfulness. She rose slowly, the cold air suddenly sharp in her lungs. The bear didn't move toward them, but its body lowered slightly, muscles taut under its thick fur. The figures turned almost in unison and disappeared into the trees. Mara crossed to where they had stood, but there were no tracks in the snow. No sign they'd been there at all. She turned back to the bear, unsettled. "Did you see?" The bear was already moving toward her, brushing past and heading for the path back to the cabin. She followed, glancing over her shoulder more than once, the feeling of being watched clinging to her all the way home. The older woman was waiting on the porch when they returned, her eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of Mara's expression. "You saw something?" Mara nodded. "Two people. At least, I thought they were people. But there were no tracks." The woman's face tightened. "Then they weren't people." Mara frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," the woman said, glancing at the bear, "that you're closer to remembering than I thought. And that those who wanted you gone might not be finished." Mara felt the cold sink deeper, not from the air but from the words. The woman gestured toward the cabin. "Get inside. Tonight, you stay near the fire. Tomorrow, the bear will take you the rest of the way." Mara glanced at the animal. It had settled near the porch, its bulk like a living shadow against the snow. The sight of it should have been strange, but instead it was steadying, a presence that anchored her to the moment. She went inside, but all through the day, the thought of Elena Gray's grave in the meadow and the two trackless figures lingered in her mind like a storm waiting to break. The storm rolled in overnight. By morning, the cabin was wrapped in white silence, the snow piled high against the porch rail. Mara stood at the window, watching flakes swirl past the glass. The bear was nowhere in sight, but she knew it would be there when it was time. The older woman set a steaming mug on the table. "Eat something. You'll need it." Mara turned. "For what?" "For where you're going today," the woman said. Her voice carried the same weight as the carved stone and the letters in the chest, the weight of something she'd been preparing Mara for all along. The bear appeared at the tree line just after midday. It didn't wait at the clearing's edge this time, it came closer, its great paws sinking deep into the fresh snow, stopping just shy of the porch. The woman opened the door. "Follow it. No matter what you see." Mara hesitated only long enough to pull on her coat and sling the metal box over her shoulder. The air was so cold it bit her cheeks instantly. The bear turned toward the forest, and she stepped down into its tracks. They moved quickly, the snow muffling every sound except the steady crunch of the bear's steps and her own. The forest closed in on either side, the pines leaning under the weight of snow. After what felt like an hour, the trees thinned, revealing a slope that dropped into a broad, frozen expanse. Mara realized with a start that it was a lake, its surface hidden beneath a thick blanket of snow. The bear skirted the shoreline, heading for a cluster of low hills on the far side. As they neared the hills, Mara noticed the shapes of structures, not ruins this time, but buildings still standing, though weathered by time. The largest was a long, low lodge, its log walls darkened with age. The roof sagged slightly in the middle, but the windows were intact, their panes clouded. The bear stopped before the lodge's wide front steps. Mara's breath came in clouds as she looked up at it, the sight stirring something deep in her chest. She knew this place. She didn't know how, but she did. She climbed the steps slowly, her boots crunching on the snow-packed boards. The door was heavy, the wood scarred and cold under her hands. She pushed it open. The smell of old wood, dust, and something faintly sweet hit her, a scent that pulled at her memory like a thread. Inside, the lodge was dim but intact. Long tables and benches filled the main room, a great stone fireplace dominating the far wall. Above the mantel hung a framed photograph, a black and white image of a woman standing in the snow beside a bear. Mara stepped closer, her pulse pounding. The woman in the photograph was Elena Gray. She was younger than in the photo from the box, her hair loose and dark, her expression calm but strong. The bear beside her was unmistakable, larger than in the photo, but with the same pale scar above its left eye. The bear that stood outside now. Mara reached up and touched the glass, her fingertips leaving faint smudges. The familiarity sharpened into a sudden, piercing memory, herself, small and bundled in a red coat, sitting on one of the benches while Elena laughed near the fireplace. The smell of pine sap and baking bread. The sound of the bear's claws on the wooden floor as it padded past. Her breath caught. The memory slipped away as quickly as it had come, leaving her unsteady. She turned from the fireplace to explore the rest of the lodge. Beyond the main room was a narrow hallway lined with closed doors. She opened the first and found a small bedroom, the bed neatly made beneath a heavy quilt. On the nightstand was a book with a sprig of dried lavender pressed inside. The second room held shelves filled with jars of preserves, their labels faded. The third room was locked. She tried the handle again, then noticed a hook on the wall beside the door. Hanging from it was a small iron key, cold in her hand. The lock turned with a reluctant click. She pushed the door open. Inside was a smaller room, almost empty except for a low wooden chest in the center. Unlike the others she had found, this one was new, the wood smooth, the hinges gleaming. She knelt and opened it. Inside were more photographs, neatly stacked, along with a leather-bound journal. The first page of the journal was dated only months before Elena's death. Mara's growing fast. She's stronger than I expected, but they've begun watching us again. I don't know if it's because of the bear or because of what they think she knows. I've kept the map hidden, but if something happens to me, the bear will take her where she needs to go. Mara's hands tightened on the pages. The words were not vague warnings, they were instructions. She flipped to the last entry. If I'm gone and she returns, she'll have to decide whether to stay. The bear will guard her choice. But she must not follow the ones without tracks. A chill prickled her spine. The trackless figures in the meadow. The bear's shadow fell across the doorway. Mara closed the journal and tucked it into her coat. She stepped outside, the wind sharper now. The bear turned toward the tree line, and she followed, glancing back only once at the lodge. The image of Elena in the photograph stayed with her, along with the feeling that the lodge was not just part of her past, it was part of what she might yet have to protect. The wind picked up as they left the lodge, rattling the bare branches and driving snow in sideways gusts. The bear moved with purpose, its massive shoulders rolling under thick fur, leaving deep impressions in the drifts for Mara to follow. They skirted the far edge of the lake, where the ice groaned under shifting snow. The forest ahead was darker here, the trees older, their trunks gnarled and wide. Mara kept one hand on the journal in her coat pocket. The last entry's warning, she must not follow the ones without tracks, looped in her mind. It took her a moment to notice that the bear wasn't heading toward the familiar ridges or valleys she'd seen before. This part of the forest felt different, quieter, but not in a peaceful way. The silence here was expectant, like a breath held too long. Snow began to fall harder, swirling in tight eddies between the trees. Her vision narrowed to the space just ahead of her boots, to the bear's tracks she dared not lose. When the bear suddenly stopped, she almost walked into it. The animal's head lifted, nostrils flaring. Mara followed its gaze and froze. Between the trees ahead, no more than 20 paces away, stood one of the figures she had seen in the meadow. Its shape was human, but the edges seemed blurred, its outline shifting slightly against the snow. Her stomach tightened. The bear let out a low, deep growl, the sound rolling through the stillness. The figure didn't move, but as Mara blinked, there were two of them. She forced herself to look down at the snow beneath their feet. There were no tracks. The bear stepped sideways, placing itself between Mara and the figures. It didn't rear up or charge, instead, it took a slow step backward, nudging her with its massive flank. Mara's instincts screamed at her to run, but the bear's controlled retreat told her something else: move, but don't turn your back. The figures tilted their heads slightly, in eerie unison. The snow between them darkened, as though shadows were pooling there despite the overcast sky. Mara kept moving, step for step with the bear, until a gust of wind swept between them. When the snow cleared, the figures were gone. Her breathing came fast, the air burning her lungs. The bear didn't look back, pressing onward into the forest. Mara followed, glancing over her shoulder every few steps, half expecting to see them again. The path narrowed as they climbed a low rise. At the top, the trees thinned to reveal another clearing, smaller than the meadow, but with a single structure in the center. It was a cabin, but unlike the others she had seen, this one was pristine. The logs were freshly cut, the roof free of sag, the chimney clean. Snow lay undisturbed around it, as though no one had set foot there in years. The bear stopped at the edge of the clearing, watching her. Mara approached slowly, her boots crunching in the untouched snow. The air here was still, the silence complete. The door was closed, but not locked. When she pushed it open, warm air met her face, and a smell she couldn't place, though it filled her with a sense of home so sharp it hurt. Inside, the cabin was lit by a single lantern on the table. A kettle sat on the stove, steam curling from its spout. Mara's heart pounded. Someone had been here moments ago. She stepped further in, her eyes scanning the single room. There was no one in sight, but on the table lay another letter, the paper weighted down by a smooth river stone. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it. Mara. If you've come this far, then the bear has done more than keep you safe, it has brought you to where you belong. But you must understand, the ones without tracks will not stop. They have been searching since the day you left. They believe you know something that even I could never write down. And maybe you do. There's only one way to keep it safe. You'll have to decide before the thaw. The letter was signed with a name she hadn't seen before, Ilara. She didn't know the name, but it pulled at her like a tide, familiar in a way that made her throat tighten. A sound behind her made her turn sharply. The bear stood in the doorway, its breath visible in the lantern light. Beyond it, the forest was darker now, the snowfall easing but the shadows between the trees thickening. She knew, without being told, that they were out there. Watching. Waiting. Mara slipped the letter into her coat and nodded to the bear. I'm ready to go. The bear turned, leading her back toward the trees. She followed without looking back at the cabin. She knew it would still be there if she needed it, unchanged, waiting. But as they moved into the forest, the sound of branches shifting overhead made her realize they weren't alone on the return journey. The forest pressed close around them, the darkness between the trees deepening as the day slid toward dusk. The snowfall had slowed to a thin, steady drift, each flake catching what little light remained. Mara stayed close to the bear, her boots sinking into the deep, freshly broken trail. Her mind replayed the letter over and over. You'll have to decide before the thaw. They climbed a gradual rise and came to a place where the trees thinned, forming a natural circle. In the center stood the older woman from the first cabin, her coat dusted with snow. She was waiting, as though she had known they would pass this way. You went far today, the woman said, her gaze moving from Mara to the bear. Did you find her cabin? Mara nodded. It was ready. As if someone had just been there. And there was another letter. The woman's expression flickered, some emotion passing across her face before she said, Then you've been given the choice. Mara hesitated. The choice for what? To keep what's hidden, or to give it up. The bear shifted its weight beside her, snow falling from its thick fur. Mara frowned. What exactly is it I'm supposed to be keeping? The woman stepped closer, her boots leaving deep prints in the snow. It's not an object. It's a memory. Something they've been trying to erase for decades. And you, she looked Mara squarely in the eyes, you're the last one who has it. Mara shook her head. If I had it, I'd know. Not if they buried it deep enough. The words sent a chill through her deeper than the cold air. The woman glanced at the surrounding trees. They're near again. Mara stiffened. The ones without tracks. The woman nodded. They're not what they look like. They wear faces you've seen before, or ones you think you should recognize. But they can't leave a trace in snow or soil. And if they get close enough to touch you? She didn't finish the sentence. Mara looked to the bear. The animal's ears were pricked forward, its body angled toward the shadows at the far side of the clearing. The woman lowered her voice. The bear isn't just guarding you. It's guarding what's in you. That's why it stayed all these years. That's why it knows where to take you, and where not to. Mara's breath caught. You're saying it knows more about my past than I do. The woman's mouth curved into the faintest, saddest smile. It remembers the day they came for you. And the day you ran. A movement at the edge of her vision made Mara turn sharply. There, between two dark pines, a figure stood. Human-shaped, still, its outline shimmering faintly. The bear growled, a deep, rolling sound that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. Two more figures appeared behind the first, each one blurred, indistinct, their shapes bending strangely in the dim light. Mara's pulse pounded in her ears. The woman stepped back toward the bear. We can't stay here. It's too open. The bear turned, leading them away from the clearing at a brisk pace. Mara followed, every step deliberate, her eyes scanning the trees. The figures didn't move to block their path, but she caught glimpses of them between the trunks, always the same distance away, always watching. The forest grew denser, the snow underfoot deeper. The woman's breathing came heavier now, her boots catching on hidden roots. Then the bear stopped abruptly. They stood at the edge of a deep ravine. At the bottom ran a half-frozen stream, the water dark under jagged plates of ice. The bear descended first, its weight making the snow slide in soft sheets. Mara followed carefully, using the bear's tracks as steps. When they reached the other side, the figures were gone. The silence here was thicker, the wind stilled. The woman sank onto a fallen log, catching her breath. They won't cross running water. Not easily. We have until nightfall. Mara glanced back toward the ravine. Why not? What are they? Not spirits, not exactly. Not people either. They're echoes, what's left of those who gave up their memories willingly. But they don't like to see someone keeping what they lost. Mara frowned. If they're just echoes, how can they take something from me? The woman's eyes were steady. Because an echo can still touch the original sound. The bear rumbled low in its chest, then started walking again, this time toward a steep ridge ahead. The woman rose. It's leading you to the last place. When you see it, you'll remember. And then you'll have to choose. Mara tightened her grip on the strap of the box at her side. And if I choose wrong? The woman's voice was quiet. Then the bear will have to keep its promise without you. They climbed in silence, the ridge growing steeper, the air colder. Mara's legs ached, but she kept her eyes on the bear's broad back. Near the top, the trees fell away to reveal a sweeping view of the snowbound forest below. And there, half hidden by drifts, was a place Mara didn't recognize but felt as if she'd known all her life. A lone stone tower, roofless but still standing, rose from the ridge's far end. The bear stopped beside it, turning to wait for her. The wind hit her as she stepped onto the ridge's exposed crest, carrying with it the faint scent of pine resin and something older, stone warmed by a sun that wasn't there. The tower stood ahead, its weathered walls streaked with ice, the open roof framing a rectangle of pale winter sky. The bear waited at the base, unmoving, its dark eyes fixed on her. Mara approached slowly, each step crunching in the untouched snow. The entrance to the tower was little more than a narrow archway, its lintel carved with symbols she didn't recognize. Yet her gaze caught on one of them, and her breath hitched. She had traced that mark once before, with smaller fingers. Inside, the air was still, the sound of the wind fading to a low hum. Snow had drifted in through the roofless top, forming a pale circle in the center of the floor. Around it, the stone was bare, worn smooth by time. She stepped into the circle. The moment her boots touched the snow, a memory surged up with such force she had to grip the wall to stay standing. She was small again, maybe 6 years old, wearing the red coat she remembered from the lodge. Elena was there, smiling, her breath visible in the cold, her gloved hand resting on Mara's shoulder. The bear stood beside them, larger than life, its head lowered as if listening. Elena's voice came back to her as clear as if she were standing in front of her now. If you forget everything else, remember this place. It's where we keep what can't be taken. If they come for you, the bear will bring you back here. In the memory, Elena knelt so they were eye to eye. She pressed a small, smooth stone into Mara's mittened hand. On it was carved the same symbol from the tower's lintel. When you're ready, it will tell you what to do. The memory dissolved, leaving Mara on her knees in the snow, her breath coming fast. She looked down, her gloved hand was empty now, but the sensation of the stone lingered in her palm like a ghost. The bear stepped into the circle with her. It lowered its massive head until its forehead almost touched hers. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of its slow, steady breathing. She understood then that the bear remembered everything. It had been there the day the memory was planted, the day she was sent away, the day the trackless began following. The woman from the first cabin appeared in the archway, her expression unreadable. "It's back now, isn't it?" Mara nodded slowly. "I know what they want. And I know why they can't have it." The woman's gaze flicked to the shadows at the edge of the ridge. Figures stood there, for now, their shapes rippling faintly against the snow. "They'll keep coming," the woman said. "Unless you make the choice." Mara looked at the bear. Its eyes were steady, patient, as if it would wait forever for her decision. She reached into her coat and pulled out the journal, the letters, the metal box. One by one, she placed them in the snow at the center of the circle. Then she closed her eyes and pictured the carved stone in her hand. She felt its weight, its shape, the groove of the symbol under her thumb. When she opened her eyes, the stone was there, real, solid, resting in her palm. The figures at the ridge's edge shifted, as if sensing the moment. Mara stood, holding the stone tightly. "If I keep this, they'll keep following. But if I give it up, they'll stop," the woman finished. "But so will the bear." The words landed like a blow. The bear did not move. For a long moment, Mara stood in the center of the tower, the wind threading through the open roof, the snow cold against her boots. She thought about the years she didn't remember, the life she had built without them, the quiet mornings before the bear appeared. And she thought about the moment she had stepped into the forest after it. She looked at the bear one last time. "Stay with me." The bear blinked slowly, a deep rumble vibrating in its chest. She closed her fingers around the stone and slipped it into her coat pocket. The figures at the ridge shuddered, their outlines bending sharply before breaking apart into wisps that faded into the wind. The woman in the archway nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "Then you've chosen." Mara stepped out of the circle, the bear following. The three of them, woman, bear, and Mara, left the tower behind, their tracks the only marks on the ridge. By the time they reached the forest again, night was falling. The bear walked beside her now, not leading, its massive presence a constant warmth in the freezing dark. Mara didn't know what would come next. But she knew the bear would be there when it did. And for the first time, she felt ready.